In this video, I'm going to walk you through each of the classes in Diablo Immortal so that you can have a better understanding of what class you may want to play as, or maybe you want to reroll to pick a different one because you don't like the current one you're using. I'm going to show you each one and give you a rough idea of what each class is designed to do. Okay, I'm going to go through these one at a time. Let's start with the Barbarian. So, if you are the type of player who just wants to get in there and just smack things around and not really have to fidget around with keeping distances and dodging and juking around and playing the field, if you don't really want to play that way, Barbarian is going to be your go-to class. Also, if you're going to pay to win, Barbarian is definitely going to be one of your classes to consider, because the goal of the Barbarian, generally speaking, in a general way, is to just face tank and just fight your way through it. And like, the Barbarian has lifesteal in the auto attacks and can amplify that lifesteal once you get past level 50. There's different things the Barbarian can do. They have a cheat death ability and things. So the goal of the Barbarian, generally speaking, is to kind of just pull a bunch of enemies together and then just AoE on them and just take the damage, basically. So it's really a class that's conducive with pay to win. If you're free to play, it's going to be harder to play the Barbarian, but it's definitely for any player who wants that style of class, where it's just get in there and slam things around, basically. But if you want to be skillful when playing the Barbarian, there are options as well. They have a dash, they have the ability to pull people in, so there's a combo of like pull with chains, hit them with a cleave, dash through them, and turn and hit them again. There's different things you could do to minimize the amount of damage you take, so you don't need as good of gear with the Barbarian. But again, Barbarian is designed for just face tanking, lifesteal, just surviving through it and just fighting your way through it. It's just really, it's exactly what the name entails. It's exactly what you would expect for a Barbarian. So if that sounds appealing to you, definitely consider playing the Barbarian. As for PvP, this video is not really going to focus on PvP because it's something that can just change with patches and whatever, and any class could change in the future based on balance patches and those types of things. So I'm going to leave that element of the game out of this. You can look through the abilities and try to figure out for yourself if you think if you're trying to find like best PvP class in the game. I will touch on that in a video sometime in the future once the game's more settled. Next up is the Monk. This is a very specific type of character for a very specific type of player. So the Monk is the real team player in this game. So if you don't plan on playing with friends, if you plan on playing solo, do not pick the Monk. The Monk is meant for group play entirely. It has crowd control. It can buff or debuff, allies and enemies, that type of stuff. And it's high mobility, high survivability, but it's not really fun to play if it's just you. I mean, you can make it work. You definitely can make it work, but you're not going to be playing to the class's strengths if you do that. The Monk has a bunch of really interesting abilities. It has a kick that you can use 3 times in a row to reposition yourself. It has abilities that will push enemies away in order to either protect yourself or your allies. And at higher levels, you'll have an ability that will give shields to allies, and you'll also have an ability that will reduce the damage your allies take. So again, it's really a team character. There's a specific scenario where this happens, so like I can just see it now. Okay, what happens is a group of people join the game. Maybe it's like some guy and his girlfriend even, let's say, and he gets the girl to play the support class basically, and then she doesn't know why the game's not fun because she's playing the boring support class, and she's like, this game sucks. I mean, that could happen. I could see that scenario happening. But if you actually are a genuine support player and you actually do want to play it that way, then the Monk is going to be your go-to class, especially if you're coming into the pre-existing group, so you always have a group to play with. Then the Monk could work for you if you're into that playstyle. Also, don't forget, this is a team game. There's a warband system, a clan system, and things. This game encourages you to play with other people, so you may actually end up playing with people even if you came in solo. So keep that in mind. So if you really want to be a team player, Monk will be your go-to class. Next up, we have the Crusader. Now, you may think of the Crusader as being a support class, but it's not. It does have one ability at level 50 that'll give all your allies and you literal invincibility for 3 seconds, which is extremely useful, certain boss fights and situations. But other than that, it really just plays itself. There's no like buffing and debuffing really that much. So the Crusader is going to be a lighter version of the Barbarian. So unlike the Barbarian, who just face tanks in melee, the Crusader, while it is a melee class, is going to rely more heavily on its abilities. So you'll have an ability that called Consecration. That's like your bread and butter damage. It does AoE damage around you. And then other than that, you're going to have like, there's a lot of options, but just an example way that you would play is there's like this sword ability that you can use to do damage on the ground, like area AoE damage, and you put it at your feet. You can use Consecration. You can use the shield ability and pull enemies in. You can use it 3 times, pull them all into the AoE, and then just beat on them for a second. Hopefully, clear mobs that way, at least for mob clear. Also, like every class, you have 2 options for your basic attacks, and Punish is the way to go, because even though you're a melee class, you're not really going to be meleeing as much as you would think. You're really actually going to be relying on your abilities a lot. And so it's better just to have the block chance instead of the AoE damage so that you can have more survivability. And when you use your ultimate with that, it'll give you like a shield for 20% of your health and increase your block chance even further when you auto attack. So it just gives you survivability while you're waiting for your cooldowns, and then you're just going to be using cooldowns to do AoE damage and pull enemies in and stuff like that. The last ability I want to mention though with the Crusader is there's a horse ability that is called Draw and Quarter. And what that will do is literally summon a horse, and it'll change your ability so you like throw chains and pulls up to 6 enemies together, which can be probably more useful for certain boss fights than just general mob clear. But it's a good mobility. You can traverse dungeons with it, and it cleanses, slows, and gives you a movement speed increase of 60%. And so if you find yourself getting hit by a boss ability that slows you, you can save your own life by using the mount ability, and it'll cleanse that slow, and you can just get out of the damage and stay alive. So Crusader, it's like a lighter version of Barbarian. It's a little bit more finesse than the Barbarian. It's technically a melee class, but you'll be relying a lot more heavily on your skills than you would with the Barbarian. Now let's talk about the Necromancer. This is the first of the 3 potential ranged classes in this game. So the Necromancer is one that a lot of people will find fun for solo play. It's definitely up on the list for fun solo play characters, along with Crusader, surprisingly fun, but melee classes are sometimes tough as a solo player. So Necromancer is all about summoning skeletons, exploding skeletons, corpses and exploding corpses, and summoning skeletons and golems and things like that. So like early game, you'll end up just finding yourself using an ability called Grim Scythe and Corpse Explosion over and over again. And then there's also one where you summon the skeleton that's just like basically a turret for 13 seconds and just shoots ranged attacks. And you'll throw down your turret and you'll scythe enemies, which summons a corpse. You'll explode the corpse and so on. And then you'll also get Wraith Form, which lets you, go into ethereal form, move faster, get out of dodge, don't get killed, basically. Early game, that's like a really good option. And for your primary, you'll use what's called Soulfire, just as high single target damage. But later on, the Necromancer really gets good later on in the game, because later on, you'll get an ability called Bone Armor, which just makes you way tankier. You might want to swap out that Wraith Form with Bone Armor, potentially. And then at level 50, you get this thing where you get to summon a golem, which is just great distraction. It keeps enemies busy. It's just really useful ability to have. And then you could also use Dark Curse at later levels instead of Grim Scythe to be able to have more range, so you don't have to get up close to enemies anymore, because the biggest weakness of Necromancer is having to get close. And once you take that away, then suddenly you have a lot more options. And if at the end game you'd rather just have more raw DPS, you could get Bone Spirits instead. It's a channeled ability that just sends ghosts out in front of you dealing damage. The Necromancer has a lot of options on how you want to play. It's just like, it's fun to be able to summon things and stuff. And the Necromancer, like if you want to be more tanky, you can get Bone Armor and get the Golem. And then like there's so many different options for a few different play styles with the Necromancer. So it's actually I'd highly recommend it as a solo class if you feel like playing that style of character, where it's just kind of like a mix of ranged and summoning and kind of like trick abilities that do like, odd, interesting things. It's definitely a very interesting class and high on my list for solo play choices. Next up, we have the Wizard, the second ranged class. And this one is about what you'd expect. I mean, it's just massive AoE damage. It's a ranged character. Surprisingly, it has a lot of mobility, though. It has a teleport that can have 3 charges for repositioning. So while it is kind of a glass cannon feel, it does have high mobility in order to protect itself, which is really nice. With the wizard, your bread and butter is really going to be ice crystal along with teleport to keep them in the ice crystal, and you'll also have this ray of frost ability that you can shoot into the ice crystal, which will then permeate that single like line damage into an AoE to everything in that. That's like your mob clear specifically. And then at lower level, you'll have lightning orbs, which just do damage around you, but later on you can swap that out with black hole, and black hole will pull enemies all together, which will keep them in your ice crystal for more damage. The wizard's just basically the ultimate mob clear character. If you just want to do big AoE damage, and that's your role in your group, or even for solo play, I mean, it's a decent solo play character too, because any ranged character is always going to be a decent solo play character in a game like Diablo Immortal. So decent solo play character as well. And you even have a decent basic attack. I mean, it just does damage basically. Magic missile's kind of the go-to, but great. That's like really good for just bosses. You just farm them down with your basic attacks, and it's just a well-balanced class. I mean, you almost know what you're getting into with a wizard type class. So it's pretty much what you'd expect, and if you're into big AoE damage and easy mob clear, then the wizard is going to be your class. Last but not least is the Demon Hunter. Now I saved this for last because this is the one that I have played the most and I know the most about. So Demon Hunter, probably the best solo play character that you can play. It has good mobility. It has a grappling ability that you can use just to move around or even to reposition that does damage. The Demon Hunter does crazy single target DPS. I'm not 100% sure about the other classes if they can compare or not, but I just know that the Demon Hunter has really high single target DPS and it's safe DPS. It's really like, because it's all ranged, it's much safer than the other classes. On top of that, depending on how you build it, the Demon Hunter has decent AoE clear, actually. Surprisingly decent. Not as good as something like the Wizard, but it's acceptable. Especially once you hit higher level and you get the explosive shot as your primary, then suddenly, as soon as you hit that mark in the game, your AoE clear is just great. It's totally fine. You'll be able to clear anything you want. The cooldowns for the AoEs are a little bit long feeling, but between the traps and the arrow rain, it's okay. As for what build to use, there are options. It depends on what you're doing. Like, obviously, if you're going to do PvP, the abilities are going to be a little bit different or something like that. And that goes for any of the previous classes I talked about as well. But focused on PvE here, like the rest of the classes, the most versatile build that I've found with this one is Explosive Arrow for AoE damage. And then you can use Daring Swing for mobility and for AoE damage. It has 2 charges. So you can easily just use one of them for AoE damage and then still have one ready in case you get like rooted or something and you need to move. So you can like use one and then have one available still to save yourself. And then there's this ability called Knife Trap that is really, really good. Really, really strong. Really high DPS total for AoE mob clear, because it'll put a trap on the ground, and then if any enemies are nearby the trap, then the trap takes like a second to place, and then it'll explode. If the enemy's nearby, it'll activate, then explode, and do a ton of damage. And you can have 3 charges, and the cooldown of how fast they recharge is very fast. So you just find yourself constantly placing them to just do damage. Even to bosses, you'll be attacking, if you're able to be close to a boss while fighting it, attacking it and then place one, attacking it and then placing one. It just explodes because you're right on top of the boss anyway, you know. Another good one another option for what I recommend for a versatile just build for doing Elder Rifts and just general gameplay. Reign of Vengeance, it's really like, I tried swapping this out with other ones. It's just so necessary feeling, because when there's a lot of mobs and you don't quite have your cooldowns that you need to deal with it, this is just gonna just clear all the mobs. I mean, and it does crazy damage compared to the other abilities. So even for bosses, just throw it on the boss. It just does a ton of damage. Like, it does a lot of damage. The cooldown feels kind of long, but it's the absolute best mob clear that this class has, so I highly recommend using that. And then Sentry is a must-have for any boss. The additional single target damage that you get when you throw down 2 sentries is absurd. If you go to a boss and you put down, usually what you'll do is you'll put 2 sentries like as far away as possible from the boss on the back side of the boss, like spread out. You don't want to put the sentries on top of each other because then they just get killed together. You spread them out and put them up where you're not, and then they'll be shooting at the boss while the boss tries to fight you. and the damage you get is just absolutely ridiculous. They just keep this, I don't know, it will like double or triple your DPS to the boss, something like that. It's just crazy. So necessary for boss clear. I've tried swapping these out with other ones, and just nothing seems as good. Spinning Chakram or whatever has potential in here somewhere in a build, but the problem is there's 3 of them, and when you go to get it back, it will come, like, you need to get it back for it to be effective, because then it'll give you the cooldown back. But what happens is if you're moving, it'll change the trajectory, so if you're actually just wiggling around like this, then it will just miss you and you won't get your cooldown back. And that's all the classes in Diablo Immortal. I hope that helps you out. That'll give you a better idea of what class to pick, or maybe you don't like the class that you're playing and you're thinking about re-rolling, and you want to get a better feel of how the other classes play or different ways that you could play them and stuff. And that's really what I was hoping to give you, just helping you to make a decision about the overarching play style of each class and how it feels to play the class and what to expect, just so you know what to pick and know what to do. In the future, I will be looking at going deeper into each class, but even right now, I don't know how long this is because this video is split into multiple recordings, so I'm recording it, but I'm assuming I'm at like the 14-15 minute mark or something with just summarizing like this, so I can't go into detail in this one video. So in the future, I'll try to break down classes in more detail, specifically build guides if I can get around to it for each class, and whatever else makes sense. Maybe PvP related things at some point. So definitely consider, well, you could consider subscribing for that in the short term. But yeah, hopefully this video helped you out. Hopefully now you have a better idea of what class to pick in Diablo Immortal.